Hello, thanks for listening to the Finance Leadership Podcast. This is the latest update and news from the Finance Leadership Programme. It's produced by AICPA and CIMA together as the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more at aicpa-cima.com or the FLP website, which is enroll.cgma.org. I'm Kevin Gormley, joined today by John Bannon from First Intuition. So we're recording this in the evening time in the UK. John, so good evening and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to do it. So I'm John. I'm a director at First Intuition in the South Central region, and I've been in this position for about 5 years, 11 years in total at First Intuition. Worked actually for Travelex, the foreign exchange company, for many years before that in a variety of finance roles, finance analyst. I did some internal audit work as well. And happy to obviously be at First Intuition now, working, as I know we're going to get to, working on the FLP side of things.
Great, John, thanks. So for our listeners, just to explain this, First Intuition are a partner of CIMA and now resell the FLP product as part of their offering to your client base. It's fair to say, John, it's a fairly recent partnership in regards with FLP.
Yes, that's right. I think we had our first sign-ups at First Intuition in March time, so just under a year, I guess.
As you know, we have a number of resellers in the UK that resell FLP as the platform for study, and what some of these resellers are doing is layering on their value add on top of that, so that their insight, their expert tuition, and their guidance to students, which I'm sure you'll talk about, John, but you'll have a loyal client and student base that use First Intuition for their studies. So I guess the combination of FLP plus what you offer it will be of interest to your customer base.
That's exactly right. We obviously have a strong CIMA group of learners already. So FLP was definitely something that we were going to be really interested in because it's another option, another route for those CIMA learners to get to their goals. So it was always something I think that we wanted to be involved in. And like you say, we're able to take the flexibility that the platform provides and then add our specialism around that, I guess.
In terms of your experience and the students' experience, I know it's early days, John, but what's the experience been like and what sort of feedback are you getting?
Well, I think it's a really interesting one because it is obviously quite a significant change to the traditional route. Whenever you have a change like this, it's often met with either intrigue or, I guess, a bit of skepticism, most often both of those things. And I think we've certainly seen that. But I think actually when you stop and really look into the FLP and what it offers and how you can study with it, I think it's going to be something that interests so many people. The headline, obviously, that people see is that there's no exams, which is obviously really misleading. And I just think it's a great option for people to have. The flexibility that it brings, the accessibility that it brings, it's just a great alternative to the traditional CIMA route.
Obviously, you're a tutor as well as, obviously, you mentioned you're a director at First Intuition as well. So one of the reasons we have you on the podcast today, John, is twofold. You obviously to talk about your offering as a company to the market so our students and stakeholders are aware of it, but also trying to glean your expertise and your insight into what you see coming up as we approach yet another exam window for our students, and particularly, I know your expertise lies in the strategic case study.
Yeah, that's right. So I think actually that it goes really well hand in hand with the FLP conversation, because one of the things that we were working on originally was one of the challenges I think with the FLP is maybe making sure that those FLP learners are ready for case studies. So we've done lots of work on trying to make sure that that's in place to go along with the kind of add-ons that we're doing for everybody. So the bank of kind of pre-recorded lectures and the FLP learners at FI get access to any of our live online courses so they can attend any of those throughout their 12-month subscription. I think the biggest thing that we've been focusing on is around the case study and trying to maybe bridge that gap from FLP to the case study. And in fact, not just that, because I think at FLP does quite a good job in terms of how it assesses people simulation wise to get people maybe thinking more about the case study than maybe a traditional CIMA student would. So I think that kind of goes really well with that.
So you've no doubt had a close look at our pre-scene material. Any initial thoughts on how we're going to examine students? And obviously I'm not asking you to predict the future because that's impossible, but what we're trying to understand a bit is what sort of themes or maybe the competency areas that you would expect that would be a main area of focus as part of the exam.
You're absolutely right. It's really dangerous to try and question spot too specifically, but I think candidates can really prepare themselves as best as possible by actually looking at the resources that are available to everyone. So, we've obviously got the pre-scene, and you can kind of understand a bit about RotoMine in the case of the strategic case study this time around. But also we know what the core activities are on the case study. We know that what the kind of past papers have examined. So I think that's where I would tend to start off, and just thinking about RotoMine specifically then. They're a lithium mining company. The mission and vision and values talk lots about innovation. The industry generally is moving towards a lot of automation. They're heavily regulated. They talk a lot about sustainability. So although it's maybe an industry that not lots of people will know an awful lot about, I think that the themes generally, like sustainability, like R&D, spend and innovation are things that are very transferable from industries that people do know about. In terms of thinking about the pre-scene and the themes, along with innovation and R&D, things like currency risk, that will have operations in lots of different countries. So currency risk always potentially coming in there. The nature of the mining industry is that they operate in quite a few high-risk countries or high-risk regions. So political risk would be a problem there. Because they put so much stake into their environmental credentials, I guess, then reputation risk becomes an issue as soon as they do something that's not, in line with that. So I think as general themes, that would be where I would go. And then it's a case of what have we seen before? And what I often say to students in class is, imagine you had the examiner here and we could grill them for 10 minutes about, what tends to come up. Well, the past papers are the equivalent of having the examiner there ready to grill. So I think anyone who is preparing for the case study exam or goes into the case study exam without really reviewing those past papers, it's a real limitation. You're really limiting yourselves.
And obviously, as part of the platform, we have mock exams. So it will be past papers that are quite similar in terms of different industries, but we'll have strong focus on testing certain competencies, like you suggested, similar in ESG and the currency risk, which would be your financial strategy, some of the competencies within that. But there will be past papers that will be a similar type of company with similar type of problems that are definitely worth having a look at. But the mock exams within the platform, they're going to be your best source of practice before this exam.
I think anything that's tailored a bit more towards RotoMine is definitely going to be the best approach. So mock exams that are written for RotoMine are obviously great. And then I think getting the feedback is really important. So the number one thing that a learner can do is do a mock exam, have some feedback, review a debrief, look at a kind of a model answer. I think those are really valuable tools because I can, and I very probably will list off a few things that I think everybody needs to be looking at. But actually, until you sit down and do it and get some feedback and look at your answer compared to a model answer or watch a debrief, it's very difficult to know whether you're doing what you're trying to do. I'm actually in the middle of a case study course at the moment with First Intuition. So hopefully my students are going to listen to this. So they'll be very, very bored of hearing me say the same things.
I would say you'll promote it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think planning is so important. If we start a bit further back and think about getting ready for the exam. So we've spoken about reviewing the pre-scene. We've spoken about past papers. It's really important to think about what topics come up most frequently if you're able to review past papers and do that. The danger is sometimes that somebody sits down with a set of CIMA F3 notes or looks at the FLP platform for the kind of financial strategy area and think all of these topics and things are as equally as important when it comes to examinations. Now, I know obviously there's a whole range of things that can come up, but I think focusing on the things that come up the most frequently is important. So as an example, at FI, we've got what we call technical top-up sessions. So you basically do your learning in FLP, you do 3 technical top-up sessions, which are 3 evenings. We go through the most commonly examined topics and kind of how they might appear, and give you a bit of a recap, and then into the kind of normal case study route, normal case study prep courses. So I think all that's really important. If we're thinking about the day and its exam time, I think planning is so important. If you've got 10, 20 people in a room, it's okay for them all to plan in a different way, different lengths of time, different structures on the screen. But I think planning is essential. You have to plan. And if I had, 5 mock exam scripts in front of me, I can very quickly see who's not planning. That's a really easy point to improve. Following on from that, but kind of part of the planning process is depth. And, I can remember when I went to school writing essays and people would say, point, explain, relate. And actually the kind of advice isn't that much different to that. It's a lot about depth. It's a lot about development. And the best answers that I see are where candidates are able to link really complex ideas together and do it in the context of RotoMine in this case. So I think the danger is you read an answer and it could be about any company. And we definitely don't ever want that. There's a bit of a running joke in my class that I give a lot of feedback that just says why ? And so what ? And it's just, getting people to think about those questions before they hand in the mock.
Yeah, just ask yourself, why are you making that statement? And how does it relate to the company that you're currently reviewing?
I really love the whole CIMA focus on this is your role within the company. These are the people you're working with. I really try and encourage students to put their RotoMine hat on when they come in the door. Every discussion that we'd have as a group then would be about RotoMine, and it's almost, you're almost just role playing the position that you're supposed to have, because sometimes I'll see a mock exam and I'll think to myself, I know that person wouldn't write that way at work, or they're much better at work than this mock would suggest. And I think it's just about trying to immerse yourself in the scenario as best you can.
Try and be as natural as you can. So if you take on the role of John as a financial controller, and then you report to Terry, who's a financial director, that you immerse yourself as John writing to Terry.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of students fail to do that, and they just write facts based on learning that they haven't made that fact relevant to the situation at hand. So I'm sure it frustrates you as a tutor.
It does. And I think that's just a hurdle that you have to clear quite early in the preparation. And actually, I think it's one that can be done fairly easily, but it's just about moving away from this kind of memorizing how to do something or memorizing facts and then regurgitating them. That's not going to get you through the case study. FLP does a good job of getting them ready for that, I think, because the assessment in FLP is in that kind of simulation style rather than an objective test exam. So.
Yeah, that's true. With the business simulation assignments, and to just them concepts early of integration, lots of bits of information pertinent to answering a bunch of scenarios.
Yeah.
So we're thinking differently in these exams, particularly at strategic level, and you got to demonstrate that maturity and show that maturity of your answers. So you're relating some of your suggestions back to theory, but you're making them I repeat myself so many times on these subjects, but you have to sometimes to get people to fully understand that there's no point writing about something you learned in class unless it's directly relevant to the situation at hand, because all you're demonstrating is memory recall, but you're getting tested at a much higher level in these exams than memory recall, because this is not university. This is not A-levels. It's professional qualification. That's how you're assessed.
I think it comes back to that, again, thinking back to my school days, the idea that you get lots of people that will answer the question that they wanted instead of the question that's being asked. And sometimes the question that people want is just, tell me as much as you know, for example, about hedging techniques, currency hedging techniques. And then it's okay to know that. It's important to know the techniques, but you have to make it relevant and have to put it in the correct context. In fact, one of the things that I always tell people as well is to make a point and then maybe reread the question quickly. And if you're making 5 points and you reread the question each time, it just means that you don't stray away. I sometimes see a mock exam where people will start off really strongly. And I can remember doing this myself. You just get caught up in an idea and it takes you off in a slightly different direction. It's important to really focus exactly on the question asked, which sounds obvious, but is something that I think when you're in an exam and there's lots of time pressure, it's quite tricky.
Yeah, what I've heard students do is in the exam center, and they've got the scribble pad, is they actually write down the question that they're answering, or sometimes the questions are two-parter, obviously, which complicates things. But they often would type a few sentences, and then they would look at the question again and continue to do so and look at the question again, because it's just that focus that, okay, why am I writing this and how is it relevant to the answer? So lots of students I know that have been successful. So in this example with lithium mining, which is obviously a big industry and it's very relevant to everyone's normal and everyday lives, but what's your view on students that say, well, I went and read everything about mining in the financial journals, I read board packs, I read investment reports about companies involved in mining and the challenges they faced, what their strategies were, and you could easily get this information online. It's not relevant to the direct questions that you'll face in this exam, nor do you need to do that. But do you find that's a good thing to do because it changes your perspective on the industry as a whole?
I think it's a really interesting one. If you've got lots of time, you're able to organize your weekends or cancelled social events, I think it's useful. Something that I often do is I will just take that job on and send like a link to an article or something about a real life mining company to the students and see what they think. I think there is definitely some benefit. I think if we take, a case study on supermarkets, for example, and compare it with mining, we're also used to visiting a supermarket that we kind of know lots about supermarkets already. Even if we don't think about it from an operational perspective or a strategic perspective, we can very quickly make the link. I think obviously with something like mining, I personally don't have lots of mining experience, which I imagine is the same for most students. To give you the best answer would be in preparing for the RotoMine courses to start, I did have a quick read over a few different mining companies. And I think they're good in the sense that they do, like you say, give you some context and you get to think about what challenges these companies are facing in real life. I wouldn't advise people spend lots and lots of time. I think going back to what we said a bit earlier, the mock exams, the past papers, I think those are the times where I'd really urge people to spend the most time. But I think there's nothing wrong with, if you've got half an hour spare one evening after work and you think, I'm not really going to have time to do a mock question or something, using that time wisely and just having to read through a few bits about real life companies, I think is good. I also think that there's real life examples that you can use maybe that don't have to be linked to mining. So if there's an example in real life of a company that's had their reputation damaged because of an environmental problem, or they're claiming to be a really sustainable, environmentally friendly company, and then it turns out that they haven't been. I think you can use those types of examples, whether they're from the mining companies or not. But I think short answer would be yes, have a read if you have time, but don't make that the main focus.
We cover this quite a bit also, but time management in exams and the pressure that exerts. Have you any hints or views on that?
When you're preparing for these exams, there's obviously an awful lot of unknowns and there's a lot of things that you're not in control of. Obviously, you're in control of how much work you do beforehand and that sort of thing, but on the day, there's very little that you're in control of. And I think time management is something that you are 100% in control of. Obviously, you get kicked on after an hour, say, after task one, but I think within the task, if I was sat down doing the exam tomorrow, say, one thing that I would 100% be doing is sticking to my time allocation. So I would know before I went in how long I'm going to spend on planning, because I'd try and have a routine. So for an hour question, say, some people might spend 10 minutes, some people might spend 15. I tend not to be able to convince people to spend any more than that because I think they worry about losing time. So I'd go in, I'd have my time allocation for planning. And then if it was a task, two subtasks equally weighted, I would then figure out very quickly at what time I have to move on from the first subtask. And then wherever I am within that subtask at that time, I would just force myself to move on. And I think the danger is sometimes people think, I like subtask 1 much better than subtask 2. So I'm going to spend more time. And I think that's fine, but do your time allocation on task 1, then do some of task 2. And if you run out of ideas, you can always go back to 1. But I think the danger of not doing that second subtask because you've run out of time is a real problem in the exam.
It's the old classic, you'll spend time reading or answering what you enjoy or what you know.
Yeah.
And if you don't like the question, you'll sort of, write a few bits and pieces and then move on to the thing that looks more appealing or easier.
But do you know, it's funny if I'm talking to students about a task on a mock exam, I always get them to give me their immediate reaction to the question, and then I ask them again at the end. And the amount of times they think they're going to like one of them more, and then by the time you start trying to get some ideas down, you think, actually, this is not quite as straightforward as I thought it was going to be. And then the ideas start flowing for the other task, and I think it often switches around. So I think being really strict with time hopefully will prevent any problems coming from that.
That's a good point. I think you've given us some really good insights here. And obviously worth mentioning also, if anyone's interested in the FLP offer or the First Intuition offer, they can reach out to you directly via your website or maybe LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll include that information in the show notes that'll come along with the podcast. So you'll be able to get that information included there. That's been very insightful. It's always great to get views on upcoming case studies and those who are teaching classes will have different perspectives. Looking at the case study, I suspect if you were to ask, say, 3 or 4 tutors, you'll probably get very similar themes in this one. I think it's not that it's predictable. It's the fact that you'll be tested in really different ways, but you'll know the competency areas that are likely to be tested based on the organization. But the way they ask the questions will obviously be the big challenge for students. So thanks, John, for taking your time out.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's been very insightful, and hopefully anyone can, if any more questions, can reach out to you. There's more to explore on the topic, as I say, in the show notes. To view them, just click on the episode's info icon in the podcast app or in your smartphone or tablet, or open the episode in your browser. For more information on FLP, go to enroll.cgma.org, or indeed, as I mentioned, you can visit the First Intuition website also. Thanks again to John, and thank you for listening. If you know a friend or colleague that could use this information, feel free to share it with your networks. You'll see the sharing buttons on the podcast app. That's it for now. We'll have another podcast very soon. I'm Kevin Gormley. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.
This content is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the AICPA, the Association, or CIMA. It is provided with the understanding that they are not engaged in offering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The AICPA, the Association, and CIMA make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.